There are moments in life when nothing seems outwardly wrong, yet something deep inside feels misaligned, as if the inner compass no longer points north. You may still wake up, fulfill responsibilities, speak with people, make plans, and even smile, but beneath all of that there is a quiet tension, a subtle fatigue that does not come from effort, but from inner division. This sensation often appears when the heart longs for expansion, while the mind remains trapped in patterns of protection, control, and anticipation. It is not failure, nor lack of intelligence or discipline. It is the lived experience of an inner system that has not yet learned how to move as one. Many people sense that life is calling them into something broader, more coherent, more meaningful, yet they keep encountering the same emotional walls, the same cycles of frustration, and the same sense that the universe is silent or unresponsive. What is rarely explained is that this silence is not absence but reflection. Life responds less to what we hope for and far more to the internal state from which we repeatedly operate. When the heart and the brain function in conflict, the body becomes a battleground of mixed signals, and reality tends to mirror that fragmentation. This is where neuro-spiritual understanding becomes essential, not as theory, but as lived wisdom. When emotion and cognition enter harmony, the nervous system exits survival mode and perception begins to change. Choices soften, clarity increases, and actions start emerging from coherence rather than urgency. The idea of a quantum field then stops being abstract and becomes experiential, because what shifts first is not the world outside, but the quality of presence with which you meet it. This video is an invitation to explore what truly changes when the heart and the brain learn to communicate instead of compete, not through fantasy or promises of instant transformation, but through a grounded, intimate journey into coherence, responsibility, and inner alignment. When that harmony is established, life does not need to be forced to respond. It responds naturally because you are no longer divided within yourself. There is a subtle but decisive shift that begins the moment the heart and the brain stop pulling in opposite directions. It does not arrive with fireworks or sudden revelations, but with a quiet reorganization of inner life. Thoughts slow down, emotional reactions lose their sharp edges, and the body begins to feel less like a battlefield and more like a place of residence. This shift is often misunderstood as passivity or resignation, yet it is neither. It is coherence. And coherence, once established, changes the way reality is perceived, interpreted, and lived. For a long time, human experience has been fragmented. The brain learned to prioritize prediction, control, and defense, while the heart remained associated with intuition, meaning, and emotional truth. When these two centers operate independently, life feels divided. Decisions are made intellectually, but resisted emotionally. Desires are felt deeply, but sabotaged by doubt. The result is a persistent sense of misalignment, as if every step forward requires an inner negotiation that never truly resolves. Neuro-spiritual understanding brings a different perspective. Harmony between heart and brain is not symbolic. It is physiological, emotional, and experiential. From a neurobiological standpoint, the brain is shaped by repetition. It becomes efficient at whatever emotional state is practiced most often. If stress, anticipation, and self-protection dominate daily life, the brain becomes remarkably skilled at maintaining those states. Over time, this skill feels like personality, fate, or even truth. The heart, however, operates through coherence and rhythm. When emotional signals from the heart are chaotic, the brain interprets the environment as unstable. When the heart's signals are coherent, the brain receives a message of safety, allowing perception to widen and behavior to soften. This interaction explains why many people feel trapped, despite having knowledge, resources, or opportunities. Their inner systems are not synchronized. The brain may understand new possibilities, but the heart remains conditioned by past disappointments. The body remembers what the mind tries to outgrow. In this state, life seems unresponsive, not because it is indifferent, but because the individual is internally fragmented. The quantum field, often spoken of in abstract terms, becomes relevant here as a metaphor for interaction rather than magic. What is encountered externally reflects what is stabilized internally. When coherence begins to emerge, the first noticeable change is not external success but internal permission. The individual starts allowing different emotional states to exist without immediate resistance. Calm no longer feels suspicious. Silence no longer feels empty. Moments of stillness stop triggering anxiety. This is significant because it indicates that the nervous system is learning a new baseline. The body no longer interprets rest as danger, and the mind no longer feels compelled to fill every space with anticipation or worry. As this baseline stabilizes, perception changes. Situations that once felt threatening begin to feel navigable. Conversations lose their defensive tone. Decisions become clearer, not because the future is certain, but because the present is no longer chaotic. This is the practical meaning of harmony between heart and brain. It is not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of inner order, and inner order naturally reorganizes outer experience. In this state, the concept of the field becomes experiential, attention becomes more refined, and awareness expands beyond habitual narratives. The individual notices patterns that were previously ignored, not because the world has changed, but because perception has. Opportunities that once passed unnoticed now register as possibilities. Relationships reorganize as boundaries become clearer and communication becomes more honest. None of this requires force. It emerges as a consequence of coherence. Importantly, this harmony does not eliminate emotion. It integrates it. Fear may still arise, but it no longer dominates decision-making. Desire may still exist, but it is no longer desperate. Sadness may appear, but it is not interpreted as failure. Each emotion becomes information rather than identity. This shift is profound because it ends the internal struggle to suppress or over-control emotional life. The heart is allowed to speak, and the brain learns to listen without panic. Over time, this integration alters identity. The individual no longer defines themselves by reactions, but by presence. Life begins to feel responsive because the person is no longer reacting from fragmentation. Responses become aligned, intentional, and grounded. The quantum field, in this sense, is not an external force granting favors, but a relational space in which coherence meets coherence. Life responds when it is met without internal contradiction. What changes most deeply, however, is trust. Not blind optimism, but embodied trust. A trust that arises from experiencing oneself as internally unified. When heart and brain operate together, there is less need to control outcomes because the individual trusts their capacity to respond. This trust reshapes behavior, relationships, and long-term direction. It is subtle, cumulative, and transformative. This chapter marks the beginning of that understanding, not as a technique to manipulate reality, but as an invitation to inhabit oneself more fully. When internal harmony becomes the norm, life does not need to be chased. It begins to meet the individual where they stand, reflecting the coherence that has finally taken root. At some point, awareness turns inward and reveals a difficult truth. Much of what feels like resistance from life is, in fact, resistance within the self. This realization does not arrive gently. It often comes through exhaustion, repetition, or the quiet disappointment of seeing the same patterns return despite genuine effort to change. The mind may understand new philosophies, new perspectives, even new spiritual frameworks, yet the emotional body continues to respond from older memories, unresolved grief, or long-standing self-doubt. This gap between understanding and embodiment is where many people feel lost, confused, or spiritually disconnected. The heart carries memory in a way the intellect cannot erase. Emotional experiences imprint themselves into the nervous system, shaping reactions long after the conscious mind believes the past is resolved. When these imprints remain unintegrated, the brain stays alert, scanning for danger that no longer exists. This constant vigilance narrows perception and drains vitality. Life under these conditions feels heavy and uncooperative, not because circumstances are inherently hostile, but because the internal state filters experience through tension and mistrust. Neurospiritual integration begins by acknowledging that survival patterns are intelligent adaptations, not personal flaws. At some point in time, emotional defenses were necessary. They protected, preserved, and allowed continuity. Yet what once ensured safety can later become a cage. The heart may long for expansion, connection, and meaning, while the brain continues to operate from caution, skepticism, and control. When these impulses clash, the individual oscillates between hope and withdrawal, inspiration and fatigue. Harmony between heart and brain does not mean erasing fear or doubt. It means reorganizing the internal hierarchy so that fear no longer dictates identity. As coherence develops, emotional signals are processed rather than suppressed. The body learns that intense feelings do not require immediate reaction. This learning is crucial because the nervous system interprets unprocessed emotion as threat. Once emotion is felt without escalation, the brain receives a message of stability. Over time, this rewiring softens defensive reflexes and opens space for more nuanced perception. In this state, the idea of the quantum field becomes grounded in lived experience. Rather than imagining an external force responding to wishes, attention shifts toward relational dynamics. The individual recognizes that every interaction is shaped by internal posture. Tone of voice, facial expression, timing, and presence all communicate subtle information. When internal coherence is absent, these signals are fragmented. When coherence is present, they align. Life responds to alignment not as reward, but as resonance. One of the most significant changes occurs in how time is perceived. Fragmentation creates urgency. There is always a sense of being behind, of needing to catch up, of racing against an invisible deadline. Harmony dissolves this pressure. Time begins to feel spacious again, not because responsibilities vanish, but because attention is no longer scattered. The present moment becomes inhabitable. Decisions arise with greater clarity, and actions feel more intentional. This shift alone can radically change how life unfolds. Another transformation appears in relationships. When heart and brain operate separately, interactions are often transactional or defensive. Approval is sought unconsciously, boundaries blur, and resentment accumulates. With coherence, communication becomes cleaner. There is less need to prove, justify, or anticipate rejection. Emotional honesty emerges naturally, without dramatization or withdrawal. Relationships reorganize themselves around authenticity, and this authenticity often acts as a mirror, inviting others into more grounded exchanges. The internal narrative also changes. Instead of a constant inner commentary evaluating worth, progress, or failure, silence becomes accessible. This silence is not emptiness but presence. It allows intuition to surface without being drowned out by analysis. Intuition, in this sense, is not mystical insight, but embodied intelligence. It integrates sensory input, emotional awareness, and cognitive understanding into a unified perception. Decisions informed by this integration feel stable, even when outcomes remain uncertain. Life's response to this state is subtle, but consistent. Opportunities feel less forced, challenges feel less personal, setbacks no longer dismantle self-trust. The individual remains oriented, grounded, and responsive. This responsiveness is key. Life does not remove difficulty, but it meets coherence with coherence. When actions arise from inner alignment, consequences align more smoothly with intention. Importantly, harmony is not a permanent achievement. It is a dynamic state that requires ongoing awareness. Old patterns resurface, especially under stress. The difference lies in recognition. With coherence established as a reference point, deviations are noticed sooner and corrected with less self-judgment. The individual no longer collapses into identity crises at the first sign of discomfort. Emotional waves are ridden rather than resisted. This chapter deepens the understanding that transformation is not about becoming someone else. It is about allowing the internal system to reorganize around truth rather than defense. When the heart's longing for meaning and the brain's need for safety are brought into dialogue, life becomes navigable in a new way. The quantum field, then, is not distant or abstract. It is the relational space in which coherence is continuously reflected back through experience. As harmony strengthens, a quiet confidence emerges. Not confidence in outcomes, but confidence in response. This is where life truly begins to answer, not through dramatic signs, but through a steady unfolding that feels increasingly aligned with who the individual is becoming. As coherence deepens, something unexpected begins to surface, a different relationship with uncertainty. What once felt intolerable now becomes workable. The unknown no longer triggers immediate anxiety, and ambiguity stops being interpreted as danger. This change does not occur because the future suddenly becomes predictable, but because the internal environment becomes stable enough to hold not knowing. When heart and brain communicate in harmony, Uncertainty loses its power to destabilize identity. It becomes part of the landscape rather than a threat to existence. Much of human suffering is not rooted in pain itself, but in resistance to unpredictability. The brain, trained through years of conditioning, seeks patterns that guarantee safety. When it fails to find them, it generates narratives of threat, inadequacy, or impending loss. The heart, however, senses that growth requires openness, exposure, and trust. When these two impulses are misaligned, the individual becomes trapped in hesitation. Life feels suspended, as if waiting for permission that never arrives. Harmony alters this dynamic by redefining safety. Safety is no longer equated with control, but with internal regulation. The body learns that it can remain present even when outcomes are unclear. Emotional responses are felt fully without overwhelming the system. This capacity changes how challenges are met. Instead of triggering collapse or overcompensation, difficulty becomes information. Each experience is processed, integrated, and released rather than stored as tension. In this state, the field of experience feels more responsive because the individual is more receptive. Receptivity here does not imply passivity. It refers to the ability to register subtle cues without distortion. When internal noise decreases, perception sharpens. Conversations carry more meaning. Situations reveal layers that were previously overlooked. Timing improves, not through calculation, but through attunement. Actions feel less forced and more appropriate to context. This attunement often brings a sense of alignment that is difficult to articulate. Life seems to flow, not because obstacles disappear, but because resistance decreases. The individual stops fighting against what is and starts responding from what is available. This shift is profound because it moves attention away from imagined futures and anchors it in lived reality. The present moment becomes sufficient as a place of action. As this orientation stabilizes, identity undergoes another quiet transformation. The self is no longer defined by past narratives or future expectations. Instead, it is experienced as a dynamic presence, capable of adaptation without loss of integrity. This flexibility is not weakness. It is resilience rooted in coherence. The heart provides direction through values and meaning, while the brain offers discernment and structure. Together, they create a stable yet adaptable inner framework. The quantum field, understood through this lens, reflects relational patterns rather than mystical intervention. Experiences arise that resonate with the internal state, reinforcing coherence through feedback. When choices align with values, consequences feel instructive rather than punitive. Even setbacks carry clarity. They inform rather than diminish. This reframing dissolves much of the existential anxiety that accompanies change. Another significant shift occurs in how effort is perceived. Fragmentation creates strain. Every action feels heavy, as if requiring constant justification or defense. Harmony lightens this burden. Effort remains, but it feels purposeful rather than exhausting. Energy is conserved because it is not spent managing internal conflict. Focus becomes natural, and persistence feels less like endurance and more like engagement. This internal efficiency has tangible effects. Work becomes more meaningful, relationships more transparent, and rest more restorative. The body responds with improved regulation, and the mind with increased clarity. Over time, these changes accumulate, creating a life that feels coherent rather than chaotic. The response from life mirrors this order, offering experiences that match the level of presence brought to them. Importantly, harmony does not eliminate pain or loss. Grief, disappointment, and sorrow still arise. The difference lies in how they are held. Instead of overwhelming the system, they are integrated as part of the human experience. The heart is allowed to feel, and the brain is allowed to make sense without either dominating. This balance preserves dignity, even in difficulty. As coherence becomes familiar, trust expands beyond circumstances. There is trust in one's capacity to navigate whatever arises. This trust is quiet, embodied, and grounded. It does not rely on external validation or guarantees. It emerges from repeated experiences of inner alignment, producing outer stability. Life responds not with promises, but with continuity. This chapter reveals that harmony between heart and brain reshapes the relationship with existence itself. Life is no longer approached as something to conquer or escape, but as something to engage with presence and integrity. The field responds to this engagement by reflecting coherence through experience. What emerges is not perfection, but a deep sense of participation in the unfolding of one's own life, grounded in alignment rather than fear. As inner harmony stabilizes, attention naturally turns toward meaning, not abstract meaning but lived meaning, the kind that is felt in ordinary moments and subtle choices. Life begins to feel less fragmented and more narratively coherent, as if experiences are no longer isolated events but parts of a larger movement. This does not imply that everything suddenly makes sense, but rather that existence is no longer perceived as random or hostile. There is a growing sense that one is participating in life instead of enduring it. This participation alters how responsibility is experienced. When heart and brain are misaligned, responsibility often feels heavy, moralized, or punitive. It carries the weight of expectation and fear of failure. In coherence, responsibility transforms into responsiveness. Actions are no longer driven by obligation or avoidance, but by resonance. Choices feel aligned with values, rather than imposed by circumstance. This shift has profound implications for how direction is established and sustained over time. Direction, in this context, is not rigid planning. It is an internal orientation that guides decisions without requiring constant evaluation. The heart provides a sense of purpose through felt meaning, while the brain organizes that meaning into actionable pathways. When these two centers collaborate, motivation becomes intrinsic. There is less need for external pressure or reward. Engagement arises from alignment, not compulsion. One of the most noticeable changes occurs in how setbacks are interpreted. In fragmentation, setbacks are often internalized as personal failure or evidence of inadequacy. They reinforce narratives of limitation and erode confidence. In coherence, setbacks are contextualized. They are understood as part of a dynamic process rather than final judgments. Emotional reactions still arise, but they do not define identity. The nervous system remains regulated enough to extract learning without collapsing into self-criticism. This capacity to learn without self-attack is central to sustainable transformation. It allows growth to occur without burnout. The brain, no longer threatened by emotional overload, can integrate experience efficiently. The heart, no longer silenced by fear, can recalibrate meaning. Together they create a feedback loop that supports evolution rather than stagnation. As this loop strengthens, intuition becomes more accessible. Intuition here is not mystical insight detached from reason. It is the integration of multiple streams of information processed beneath conscious awareness. When internal coherence exists, these signals can surface clearly. Decisions informed by intuition feel grounded rather than impulsive. They carry a sense of rightness that is calm, not urgent. This calm confidence further reinforces trust in one's inner guidance. The quantum field, when viewed through this lens, represents the relational dimension of experience. It reflects how internal states interact with external conditions. Coherence enhances this interaction by reducing distortion. The individual becomes more sensitive to timing, context, and nuance. Actions align more naturally with circumstances, creating outcomes that feel less forced and more organic. Life's response then appears smoother because friction has decreased. Another subtle transformation appears in self-expression. Fragmentation often leads to either inhibition or overcompensation. Words are withheld out of fear or spoken defensively. With harmony, expression becomes measured and authentic. Communication reflects inner alignment rather than emotional turbulence. This clarity fosters trust in relationships and reduces misunderstanding. Others respond differently because they are met with presence rather than projection. This shift extends beyond interpersonal dynamics into creative and professional realms. Creativity flourishes when internal conflict subsides. Ideas flow without the immediate interference of self-doubt. Work becomes an extension of identity rather than a performance to maintain. Effort is still required, but it is directed rather than scattered. Progress feels cumulative, building upon itself rather than resetting with each challenge. Rest also acquires a new quality. Incoherence often turns rest into avoidance or guilt-ridden pause. Harmony reframes rest as integration. The body recovers efficiently, and the mind quiets without resistance. This restorative capacity enhances overall resilience, allowing engagement with life to remain sustainable over time. Importantly, this state does not isolate the individual from collective experience. On the contrary, coherence enhances empathy. When internal noise quiets, sensitivity to others increases without overwhelm. Compassion arises naturally, not as obligation, but as recognition of shared humanity. This recognition further deepens connection and meaning, reinforcing the sense of belonging within a larger whole. As coherence becomes familiar, the individual's relationship with ambition changes. Goals remain, but they are no longer pursued at the expense of well-being. Success is redefined to include inner stability and ethical alignment. Achievements feel satisfying because they do not require self-betrayal. This integrity becomes a cornerstone of fulfillment. Life's response to this way of being is steady, rather than spectacular. Opportunities emerge that align with values. Challenges appear that refine, rather than derail. The unfolding feels participatory, as if existence is a dialogue rather than a test. This dialogue does not promise certainty, but it offers continuity and meaning. This chapter illustrates that harmony between heart and brain reshapes the architecture of life itself. Meaning becomes experiential, responsibility becomes responsive, and direction becomes intrinsic. The quantum field responds not through dramatic intervention, but through resonance. What unfolds is a life lived with coherence, where presence guides action and alignment sustains growth. As this journey comes to a close, what remains is not a formula, a promise, or a technique to control life, but a deeper understanding of relationship. The harmony between heart and brain is not an abstract spiritual idea, nor a purely scientific mechanism. It is a lived state of coherence that reshapes how existence is experienced from the inside out. When emotion and cognition stop competing, the body no longer needs to stay in survival mode, and perception begins to widen naturally. Life does not suddenly become easy, but it becomes intelligible, navigable, and meaningful in a way that was previously inaccessible. What truly changes is identity. The fragmented self, shaped by fear, urgency, and self-doubt, slowly gives way to a more integrated presence. This presence does not depend on circumstances to feel stable. It does not collapse when outcomes are uncertain, nor does it inflate when things go well. It rests in coherence. From this place, choices arise with greater clarity, relationships reorganize around authenticity, and effort becomes purposeful rather than exhausting. The individual no longer lives in reaction to the world, but in conversation with it. The idea of the quantum field, so often misunderstood as something external that must be persuaded or activated, reveals itself here as relational. Life responds not to desire alone, but to the state from which desire emerges. Coherence becomes the language through which reality answers. This response is rarely dramatic. It appears in timing, in encounters, in the ease or resistance with which paths unfold. It appears in the quiet confidence of knowing how to respond, even when the future remains unknown. Perhaps the most important realization is that harmony is not perfection. Emotional pain still exists. Loss, disappointment, and uncertainty remain part of the human experience. What changes is how these experiences are held. They no longer define identity or dictate direction. They are integrated, processed, and released without dismantling self-trust. This capacity marks a profound shift from survival to participation. In this state, life is no longer something to be fixed, escaped, or conquered. It becomes something to be inhabited. Meaning arises not from constant striving, but from alignment. Presence replaces urgency. Responsibility transforms into responsiveness. The individual becomes someone who can move through change without losing coherence, and through coherence, life continues to respond. This is not the end of a journey, but a point of orientation. Harmony between heart and brain is not a destination to reach once, but a relationship to cultivate over time. Each moment of coherence reinforces the next, creating a life that unfolds with integrity, depth, and resonance. And in that unfolding, the dialogue between self and reality continues steady and alive. Before this video ends, allow one question to settle quietly within you. If life has been responding all along to your inner state, who would you become if coherence rather than fear became your home? This question does not demand an immediate answer. it invites reflection, presence, and honesty. It asks you to look beyond techniques and promises and toward the quality of being you are cultivating day by day. If this exploration resonated with you, if these reflections felt familiar or illuminated something you have sensed but never fully named, this channel exists to continue that conversation. Subscribing is not about collecting content, but about staying connected to a space dedicated to depth, integration, and real transformation. Each video builds upon this foundation, offering perspectives that honor both inner experience and lived reality. As the screen transitions to the final moments, allow yourself to remain present. Continue watching the next video and stay with this journey of alignment, coherence, and conscious participation in life. The dialogue does not end here. It continues quietly and steadily in every moment you choose to meet yourself with awareness and integrity.